Hey guys, gals, and Legionnaires, Rycon here, and welcome back to Rycon Reviews, and today we're looking at episode 4 of season 8 of The Walking Dead, Some Guy, today directed by Daniel Leo, and that's a name that I haven't seen before when it comes to directing The Walking Dead. Now, Daniel has edited a large amount of The Walking Dead, but he's never directed an episode before, and this is actually only the third thing that he's credited as directing, so it was interesting to see them having, I guess you'd say, more of a junior director taking on this episode, which was honestly pretty action heavy. There was a lot going on in this episode. This episode was really featuring the kingdom in full force, well, what remained of them, and after the massacre from the previous episode, there really wasn't much of them left. We started off with Ezekiel getting ready, putting on his armor, and then giving one hell of a speech, and I've got to admit, I actually really do enjoy Ezekiel's speeches. I think they're one of the speeches that I enjoy the most. I enjoy when Rick gets a good speech on, but Ezekiel, being the poet that he is, being from theatre, he can really put together something that's quite elegant, and it was quite inspiring. But I really enjoyed the juxtaposition, because in our minds we know when he's talking, when he's giving this speech, we know where this leads. We know exactly what happened at the end of the last episode. We didn't know the extent of how bad it was, but it appears that it was quite bad. Now, those guns that Daryl and Rick were looking for, that was the guns that were there. So there were these large 50 cal guns they were trying to track down, and they'd obviously been moved to this position because they knew the kingdom was going to be attacking there for whatever reason. So I still feel like we can trust Dwight at this stage. I think Dwight's information so far has been fine, and I think that's going to kind of crystallize in Rick's mind that he's going to know that they aren't being screwed over, because that's where they were in the end, and they've been moved, and it seemed they hadn't been moved that long ago. But those guns had a devastating effect, taking out pretty much every single member of the kingdom. We only see one survivor other than Ezekiel at first, who does attempt to rescue him until he's taken out by quite possibly the most frustrating and annoying savior we've seen yet. He was a pretty minor character, but I feel like they wrote him in such a way that you just instantly hated this guy. You didn't feel any sympathy whatsoever for him, and you were just looking forward to that moment where he pegged it. And in the end, he pegged it in the most amazing fashion possible. This is going to be my favorite kill of All Out War so far. Jerry just comes in like an absolute boss and cuts the guy in half. This is not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do, but he did it, and he did it in spectacular fashion. However, poor Jerry's battle axe doesn't last much longer than that. While trying to save Ezekiel and get this damn gate open, it ends up breaking, which essentially leaves both him and Ezekiel pushed up against this chain link fence, fighting for their lives, fighting to survive. But while this is all going on, Carol is inside doing what Carol does best. So Carol was the only other survivor that we've seen from this massacre. So we essentially had all of the kingdom's forces out here, bar the ones that went to help out with the radar installation, gone. But Carol does what Carol does best, and after hiding in the ceiling, which is really thinking outside the box, I don't think I would even ever imagine hiding in the ceiling, takes out all the saviors that were carrying the guns. But unfortunately, more do turn up to reinforce, and they end up taking the guns outside and start packing them into a vehicle to take them away. Now, Carol is fully by herself at this stage. She has no backup, and she has limited ammunition, but she knows that she needs to stop those guns. And so she does all she can, getting herself behind a vehicle and shooting at the saviors. Essentially, I think she had more of a plan there, but it kind of got interrupted. She didn't see the other saviors hiding behind this truck, and she was really stuck between a rock and a hard place. She was just stuck behind this one vehicle with all the saviors firing at her. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised by the saviors here, because I haven't been in any live combat situations, but my mind would immediately go to the fact that you've got one person hiding behind a vehicle, you've got the rest of you with automatic weapons, you're all firing at her at once. So she's suppressed. She can't do anything. She can't get up from that vehicle. She's perfectly suppressed. Why none of them decided to go around the side, I will not know. They had more than enough numbers there. They could have just done one. If they did two simultaneously, they would have taken her out easy peasy. But obviously, it seems the saviors aren't all they're cracked out to be. Either that, or maybe because of the fear that Negan instills in people, they haven't actually had to fight that much. And honestly, that's the kind of headcanon I'm going with here, because even I imagine many of you as well in the comments, many of you that are watching this were probably thinking the same thing, like, why don't they try? I think there's been lots of instances so far with the saviors where it's just like, what? Like, why are they doing this? But maybe that's it. Maybe they just haven't actually had a lot of experience. They act tough. They act like they're going to run the show, but in fact, they actually don't. They have less experience than a lot of people that they're actually fighting. And that really goes to show in the situation where Carol does manage to handle herself pretty well. And in the end, it is just 2 saviors left. But at the same time, she can see that Jerry and Ezekiel are pressed up against that gate with no way through. They're in their last stand mode at the moment, and Carol can do something about this, but she's stuck. She doesn't know what to do. Go for the guns, go for her friends. In the end, she decides to go for her friends. And when I saw this happen, I was just like, oh, this is going to be interesting, because I talk about consequences a lot. You know, I enjoy that the actions that are taken in this show, they will have far-reaching consequences. And I thought that this was going to be one of those, you know, circumstances where it's going to have far-reaching consequences, because those guns are going to go off. They're going to allow the saviors to push back the dead from their compound, and they're going to be able to go and attack. But, well, we'll get to that in a moment. So Carol does come to the rescue, and she saves both Ezekiel and Jerry. And at this point, Ezekiel's just trying to drop the act altogether. He's not interested in being king. He's just destroyed. I feel like that savior really did get into his head when he was talking to him earlier on, and just losing everyone. That scene at the start, still, I feel like it just had that massive shock value to it, where you felt like there's got to be a chance that there's still someone alive, there's someone here, because they were doing so well before. You know, Ezekiel was saying not one harmed, not one had been lost, and now essentially they've lost everyone. But regardless, they do continue along their way, and they feel disheartened for a moment that the guns are gone before Carol hears a bike roaring past and knows that Daryl is going to be in hot pursuit. So essentially all of this has been going down while the last episode was going on, and finally Rick and Daryl have caught up. They found out where the guns were getting moved to from that kid that they killed at the end of the last episode, and they're finally here. So they take off after this at high speed, and in the end, they do manage to capture the guns. And I have to say, it's probably one of the coolest chase scenes that I've seen in The Walking Dead so far. Why the guy with the 50 cal wasn't shooting just directly at Rick's engine at the start, I won't know. He does eventually, but it wasn't enough. It was too little too late. Daryl managed to take him out, and then Rick performing an amazing dive from one vehicle to the other, which is quite a cool stunt to see on The Walking Dead. You usually don't see the kind of live stunts, you know, jumping between one vehicle to another on television, but I felt like it was really well done. It was just a great chase sequence. I thought it was really, really cool. And it just gave a chance for Daryl and Rick to be badasses yet again. So we have the guns back. That consequence has been avoided, at least for the time being. We'll see if they're actually able to get them out of there, and it did seem like there was a chance that maybe the guy in the back might still be alive, so they might be able to get a little bit more information, but after a crash like that, who knows? Regardless, while this is all going on, we return to Carol, Ezekiel, and Jerry, who are still trying to make their way on foot, and we come across an area where it seems there's been some kind of spill of acidic materials into the stream. Now, in the episode prior, we did see a zombie that had acid burns all over it, and I kind of made a mental note of it because I feel like Jerry or someone was saying, you know, what happened to that one? Like, they were curious as to why they were that way, and this episode gave us that answer. So obviously these zombies had been in a kind of an acid bath of the sorts, and so they've been burnt by all this acid, and maybe they still had some of that acid around. I don't know. They weren't full-on acid zombies. It wasn't Cataclysm, but still, I thought it was like an interesting scene, an interesting setup there, and obviously they were in this situation when they needed to get across this river, they needed to keep on moving, they had dead behind them, they had dead in front of them, and they'd essentially run out of ammunition at this point, and Ezekiel had it in his mind that he was going to stay, that he couldn't have anyone else give their life for him, because it just, the entire day has been that. So many piled themselves on top of him to save him from that initial barrage. I mean, there were 50 cal rounds flying his way, and it took a lot of bodies to stop that, and I feel like he's finally reached that breaking point where he's just like, no more, no one else is going to die for me. And someone else does die. And it was probably one of the saddest sequences that we've seen, I'd say, bar Eric's death. I feel like that this death was the one that kind of got me, and that was Shiva. Now, I knew that this was coming. I didn't know if there was going to be an exact one-to-one of what happened in the comics, but it was actually pretty close. In the comics, Shiva does leap in to save Ezekiel from a large amount of walkers, and we have that happen here, and Shiva was an absolute boss. I feel like if Shiva wasn't there, we would have lost Ezekiel, and, well, that has large ramifications as it goes on. Ezekiel is still an important person. And we have just, I guess, it was like a really heartbreaking scene of just 3 people walking back into the kingdom. Jerry, Carol, and Ezekiel. Just 3 people. When they left with this big war party with spirits high, and they were decimated. Out of all the forces that we've seen fighting so far, the Hilltop, Alexandria, no one has been hit as hard as them. And they've been hit really, really, really hard. And, yeah, it's going to take them a lot to come back from this. I mean, so many people have lost their loved ones from that fight. And I feel like the kingdom is going to be really on the back leg now. And so that's at least one community which is out of the fight now. Now, there are people in the kingdom, like Jerry, Carol, that will continue fighting. And I think Ezekiel will continue fighting as well, because he's not going to allow those deaths, to be in vain. But their numbers have been severely diminished after this fight, especially just their fighting force. They can't field any more people. So really, we just have the Hilltop now, and we have Alexandria. Now, we've seen all these attacks going on, to the Saviors, which has been great. They've been making really good forward progress towards them. But we are forgetting about another community which sided themselves with the Saviors. And this is a community that doesn't exist in the comics, which is the Scavengers, the Garbage Patch Kids. We haven't seen anything from them. Ever since the initial attack on Alexandria, they've been quiet. Now, not all of their people died there. There's still a lot more people, and they had all of the guns. All those guns that Rick and the others went and got, they took them and screwed them over. And we haven't seen them. And that's what makes me nervous. As a comic book reader, I don't know what's going to happen with them. But we haven't seen them for a while, and I feel like we might be seeing a return soon. That's just like my little prediction there. I feel like we might be seeing some more of them, just because we haven't seen them in a while. And I think it's probably about time that they do make that return. We still haven't seen anything of the Sanctuary. We don't know what's going on with Negan. We don't know what's going on with Father Gabriel. But they're going to have to break out eventually. I feel like they've maybe held it back for a little bit by keeping those guns away from the Sanctuary, but maybe that's what the Garbage Pail Kids have been up to. Maybe they've been called in to help, free up the dead, get them away. Who knows? But I feel like we are going to see something of them soon. I feel like we're really gearing up towards that mid-season finale, and I'm trying to predict where I think it's going to go in my mind, and it keeps on shifting. But I'm really enjoying this season. I feel like it's been action-packed. I feel like it's been exactly what All Out War was meant to be, and I feel like we are starting to really feel the effect of that. Up until now, it's been victory after victory, and now those survivors are really going to start to feel that loss and kind of go through that struggle of having to continue on afterwards. And so, as far as I'm concerned, for a first-time director of The Walking Dead, I feel like Dan did a great job with this episode. I feel like, especially being an editor as well, he's put the show together so many times. He kind of knows what he's wanting to see, and sometimes that can be a fresh perspective, and maybe that's why the showrunners decided to give Dan Leo a try. And for me, that about wraps us up. This wasn't a very long review, just because I guess today's episode was a little bit more straightforward. It hasn't had as many kind of hidden aspects to it, whereas some of the others had. This was, I feel, a little bit more straightforward, but that's perfectly fine as it is. It doesn't need to be overanalyzed. I'd like to know what you thought of the episode and what you think is going to happen next. We are building up towards the mid-season finale, so I feel like we are just going to see that intensity continue to boil. I don't think we're going to see it let off at all. I feel like it's just going to keep on up, but when I'm looking at the shots that kind of ended this episode, we definitely do seem to be getting towards later in the day. I feel like we are in the evening now, before we're in the afternoon, and we're going to see that first day of battle coming to an end, because this entire season so far has just been one day, just one day, which is pretty amazing. So that's going to wrap me up for today. Thank you all for sitting down and listening to me ramble about The Walking Dead. I love doing it, and I love hearing your responses as well. I've been Rycon. You have all been awesome, and until next time, stay tuned.